And then I did go ahead and play through all of No More Heroes 3 this week. I think it's a game that has a lot of very good intentions, specifically around it is taking a lot of what worked in No More Heroes 1, or maybe not what worked, what people maybe valued a lot in No More Heroes 1. Because like the overworld is not something that really works in No More Heroes 1 very well, but a lot of people like that overworld for a variety of reasons, but a lot of them are not that it's an actual good overworld. It's just, given the structure of the game, the tone of that game, I think it fits that Travis like drives around town and just does like a bunch of random stuff, where he's, in the case of No More Heroes 3, he's like collecting scorpions, finding kittens and things like that, planting trees. It's kind of like the overworld in No More Heroes games is a very strange thing because it's not very lively. And what you're doing in them is pretty much just finding random spots to click the A button on. But there's something almost kind of relaxing about that. Like it's a very non-stress open world. You can just kind of walk around, and there's a lot of flexibility in where you can go in that open world. So you can kind of go around and walk around in like various alleyways and things like that. And a lot of times there's nothing in the alleyways, but you just can kind of walk around and just explore. And there's just not a lot of, challenge or things that get in your way. You're just kind of doing it. And I think there's something kind of relaxing about that. And I think that's true for the original No More Heroes. I do seem to recall like really just exploring, going around the town, collecting the, like, I think they're called super balls or whatever. They're like little orbs that were flying around. So this game has a lot of that too. And if you don't know, No More Heroes 2 actually removed the overworld and just had like a, select the different hub kind of thing where you go to like upgrade your katana and things like that. But the overworld in this game feels very much like No More Heroes 1, and it's very much the same thing still of just like, there's not a lot going on there, so if that bothers you, having a very open world, or a very empty open world rather, that's still going to be a problem here. That's just how that is. Talking about the main game itself, so if you don't know what the structure of No More Heroes games are, typically it's like you have these ranked battles you go against, so you like fight different assassins, and each rank you kind of go up. So you fight the rank 10 assassin, kill them, you're rank 9, fight the rank 8 assassin, things like that. And you have to like pay a fee to get into the battle, because there's like this association who runs the combat essentially. And so in the original No More Heroes, when you did this, typically, not always, but typically there was like a lead up mission to the actual encounters. So you'd pay your fee, you go to like, the baseball stadium, and there would be like a baseball area you kind of walk around, or there would be like some mini games along the way. And usually it was like some kind of themed stage based off whatever boss you were going to go fight essentially. Not always. Like I think Destroy Man, who was kind of like a male dude, didn't really have too much of like a theme to his stage. It more or less was just like, hey, you can walk between these areas and fight things. But there are some times where it was a bit more specific on those. And whether those stages were good or not, I think is kind of a whole other thing. There's definitely some memorable moments about them for sure. One of my favorites being the one where, I forget which stage it was, but like the sprinkler system turns on, and Travis has like a beam katana that has like electricity in it, right? And so like when he's in the sprinklers, he's getting like electrically shocked the entire time. So he gets like find the sprinkler switch to turn it off like while you're being shocked. So like Travis is like all sprawled out with his limbs, like very rapidly running down the hallways screaming while he's getting electrocuted. And it's like, mechanically it's pretty much just find the thing that you need to pull the lever on, but it is like a very, the context of what you're doing it in is very entertaining and very fun. I don't really recall how No More Heroes 2 was with that. I don't recall a lot about No More Heroes 2 in general, to be honest with you. Except for I like the different beam katanas, which is something that has not returned in the series, where you have like the dual wielding beam katanas or the long beam katana. This game, they basically kept it with just a single beam katana. But Travis Strikes Again actually leaned really hard into these like pre-boss stages, and that was something I think is really the strength of Travis Strikes Again, especially early on, is that each of these stages really has like a distinct, not only aesthetic, but also flow and structure to them. I remember really liking the Coffee and Donuts level, the Thunderdome one where you're like in you're doing the bike races, and you like go back to your little tiny apartment complex at the end of the bike races, and then you like go on the computer system and go back in, kind of thing. There's a lot of really neat things about Travis Strikes Again when it comes to level design and what you're doing in those levels. And it's also, Travis Strikes Again is also a very momentum-based game, so it can kind of deal with those larger levels, I think, because Travis is almost always moving in those games. because it's like an overhead isometric game, and like your light attack lets you run at full speed even while you're swiping. And then your heavy attack you use, like, you know, it does slow you down, but there is like kind of this forward lunge to it whenever you use it. So I felt like the heavy attack was like really a powerful tool in that game. And I think a lot of people kind of did not interact with the heavy attack a lot, which I think kind of hurts the experience a bit, for better or for worse. Yeah, you can play that entire game using the light attack, but I feel like the heavy attack was definitely a more satisfying attack to do. And this game, interestingly, kind of takes a lot of elements from Travis Strikes Again, you know, mechanically, but then basically like staples them onto the original No More Heroes, which is like this behind-the-back third-person, you know, action game where you basically smash the A button. In the case of No More Heroes 1, you have like a high and a low attack, but in this game, it's just the light and heavy attack from Travis Strikes Again as well. But it is very much those arena combat sequences. And there's not many just like stages you go through. If anything, it's probably, I think, maybe the least amount of stages in a No More Heroes game. There's just like not a lot of areas that you really explore. There are some exceptions. There's like a really cool school sequence at one point that, you know, again, it's one of those things where like the school sequence is not, what you're doing in it is not particularly that interesting, but the context of what they're presenting it as is fun. And I think that's a lot of No More Heroes. It's like nothing it does is particularly great, right? But the context of what they're presenting it as is what makes it good in a lot of ways. And so there's just like not a lot of those kind of stages that feel very creative. But there's also like, instead of like, you know, just filling it in with a lot of like just go from room to room to room kind of thing, they instead spread out the like pre-boss encounters throughout the open world. So you go and you like find these different like gems in the environment, I guess you could call it. You have to collect a certain number of gems. So not all fights will contribute to you being able to go to the next battle. You have to like go find these specific gems, but it's pretty easy. They're, you know, I basically went and just did all of them just because it didn't hurt to do all of them, really, and get money and stuff for doing them too. But you know, you just go around and do these different battles, and eventually, you know, you collect the set of gems that you need to move on to the next battle. And that was often kind of treated as like the pre-boss follow-up kind of things. Like, oh, you're going to go to this region. The region's like split up into 5 different areas, and each region has like its own theme, but like what you're doing there is not particularly unique or anything like that, other than like sometimes like Thunderdome area, the outside of like this main city hub is just like a big desert, and that's it. But the actual main city hub you can go into, and it's like kind of like a Japanese I forget what it's called, like it's that thing in Osaka, like Dotonbori, I think, kind of thing, where it's like that big long walkway with like the alleyways off to the sides of them and the tower at the end. I think that's what it is. It's an area very similar to that in Japan. And so, and then like Santa Destroys, where just kind of like a suburban neighborhood kind of thing. And then you have Call of Battle, which is like a bombed out city kind of thing. So they each have their own aesthetics, but what you're doing there is pretty much just driving around, going and like, you know, starting these battles or whatever. So the point being really is that there's just not a lot of, I think, interesting stage design in this game. I think that's probably the thing that this game is lacking the most, is the stages that feel particularly good to explore. Again, not completely devoid of it, but it's just rare that they really ask you to do all that much before a stage. It's not uncommon that you just basically teleport up to this alien ship, you walk down a hallway, Sylvia talks to you on the phone, and then you go straight into a boss battle, or very quickly into the boss battle. Again, there's some exceptions here and there, like there's this one where you play like musical chairs before you do the fight, so like that's kind of, I guess you could say, the stage of that game in some ways, but it's just not a lot that you're doing in that stage ahead of time. It kind of feels like a part of the boss battle rather than a kind of preamble to it. But overall, you know, this game, I think it really picks up. It takes a while to get going, is I guess what I'm trying to say. I would say probably until about rank 7, I was pretty down on the game. I was like, I'm not loving this. I don't like any of the bosses so far, like Black Hole. There's another guy, Golden something. The rank 9 guy, I don't know. Like, he is probably the most like, wow, this is a nothing boss ever in No More Heroes. I mean, there's definitely ones that are worse, right? But like, his whole thing is basically he just says like snack, crackle, pop over and over. He's like snippety, snackle, crop. Like, and basically Travis is like burning him. And the way that Travis is, we'll get into Travis here in a second, but he's like burning him, and the whole time he's just like, snap, crackle, pop kind of thing. Every time Travis burns him, and that's kind of just his whole character. And then at the end of the fight, there's like not really any kind of dialogue or connection to Travis. It's just him being like, oh, don't kill me with the rock you have in your hand, and then Travis smashes his robot head in with the rock, and then that's the end of the encounter. It's just like, he was like the most nothing character in that particular game. At least he's definitely the most disappointing because he just does nothing. But they do try to kind of humanize a lot of like the aliens specifically. So in this game, you're fighting galactic assassins. So you go through the rank of like these aliens coming in. So they're not so much humans, at least the ones listed on the board. You do fight more bosses, but the ones listed on the board are all these aliens that are coming into the world, and you're fighting them to get to the top essentially. And there are like these really good sequences where the main kind of number one alien guy sits down and has these conversations with his little minions, and you know they're kind of cheesy, but you know at the same time I do appreciate them. You know, it does give a little more personality. It builds relationship between him and those characters. The main alien from at least from like a main story perspective is generally, you know, like shown as completely unhinged and just angry and wants to blow up stuff all the time, especially early on. But as they kind of you know, let you have these conversations between or rather you see these conversations between the main alien and like the minions, you know, some of them are a lot more personal and closer, and you just see the more human side of this alien dude, which I like that aspect of the game quite a bit. Whether it really delivers on, like, you know, paying off in terms of the main alien being kind of like humanized by the end, not really, but that's not really the point, I don't think. It's more of just, I think, to kind of fulfill certain tropes and things like that. No More Heroes is a game that has a ton of references all the time, and a lot of times I don't really know if I'm following along with it. There's this dude, I think he's like a really popular director called, like, it might be Takashi Miike or something like that. There's a cutscene every single chapter that talks about this dude's movies and stuff, and Travis kind of praising it. And you know, for the type of person Suda is, and probably a lot of people who like Grasshopper games, it makes a lot of sense. But it's someone like me who just does not really, you know, pay attention to that stuff. It's just like, okay, there's these very long sequences where they literally are just referencing movies, but it doesn't really seem like they're doing so in like a really deep way. It just seems very surface level of, we said the name. Interesting, the voice acting, they'll say the full name of the movie, but in the text on the screen, it just like blanks out certain parts of the words and things like that. So I feel like those kind of movie references, as somebody who mostly plays video games, are pretty lost on me. There's definitely a lot of them, but I think that's always been kind of a case throughout the series. This one feels a little bit more on the nose about it, like a lot of direct references to anime and movie names that I feel like was not really so much present in the past games. But at the same time, I do know that those games have had movie references in the past. I think No More Heroes 2 specifically, a lot of people said had like a lot of heavy movie references, but again, I'm not really up and up on that. I'm more on the video game kind of side, and definitely towards the end of No More Heroes 3, they do kind of amp up the video game references a bit more, so I can be a bit more appreciative of that. But it is a game that I feel like took a while for me to really get into, and then towards the end, it really started to build up, not only with better stage design, but I think better interactions between Travis and different characters, the aliens, you know, interacting with each other, things like that. The one thing I will say about this game that I kind of expected, but I'm still a little sad, did not really change that much, it's just Travis as a character. You know, it is just the development of the direction he has gone, where he's not a fun character to me anymore. He's just kind of, I kind of just expect everything. He's somebody who feels like he's like mightier than thou in a lot of ways, and like spends a lot of time just kind of trash talking people, which I mean is not something that was never part of his personality, but I think there's just like a balance in that original game in terms of him being a dumbass and then also being full of himself kind of thing. And as these games have gone on, it's become more and more about him being full of himself, and as they become more precious about Travis as a character, you know, he's been able to act on being full of himself, like, oh, I'm just gonna fucking ruin you kind of thing, and then he actually does just go ahead and kind of ruins them, because that's, you know, who he is physically at this point, being able to overtake people. A lot of times there's not that much of a struggle between him and the boss in terms of what's presented in the cutscenes, where I feel like in No More Heroes 1, you did have some of the more of those scenes where Travis was like, felt more on par with a lot of the bosses he was fighting against. And I think some of that is also just in terms of like the story as well. Like, Travis feels like somebody who's always kind of talking down to people in No More Heroes 3, where I feel like in No More Heroes 1, there's a lot more scenes where it feels like he's more of speaking as an equal to a lot of them. Not always, obviously, but I think there are cases of that. So, I don't know. It's definitely one of those things that, like, I think it's a very difficult thing to explain. I'm not somebody, I think you guys know, I'm not somebody who's great at explaining my feelings on story and characters. I'm a very straightforward, mechanics-driven person when it comes to video games. So, like, actually explaining how I feel about Travis and the characters is probably a very difficult thing to really convey. And I feel like I'm just kind of talking in a lot of vague terms here for the most part. But, yeah, if you've liked the last two No More Heroes games and where Travis has been as a character, then I think you'll be perfectly fine here. But as somebody who has not really liked those last two versions of Travis, like, I'm just kind of like, yeah, it's still him. So yeah, I think that's all I want to say about No More Heroes 3 for now, at least. It did make me appreciate Travis Strikes Again a bit more. Being separated from No More Heroes 1 and 2 for so long, I think made it a little harder for me to understand exactly what Travis Strikes Again was doing that was more unique, specifically the level design. Travis Strikes Again has pretty amazing level design early on. But Travis Strikes Again is a game that falls off on the back half of that game. Like, the levels just kind of start getting very samey towards the end and rely a bit more on aesthetics more than anything. Where No More Heroes 3 is the opposite. I feel like early on it relies more on aesthetics, and then the back half it is a bit more substantial in its content and how it handles its references and how that applies to the player as from a gameplay perspective. It's definitely much more improved over time. But I feel like the combat of this game, it's really cool that they brought in a lot of systems from Travis Strikes Again. Like, they have this Death Glove system in place, which is like the one where you have like special skills. So I think that's always or at least I think that was a really nice addition to Travis Strikes Again to vary up the battle system. And I'm very glad they brought that over. But I think the momentum-based combat, being missing is a little sad, but inherently different. Travis Strikes Again is a spin-off, and then No More Heroes is it's kind of like behind the back arena brawler kind of thing in some ways, with how it works. So overall, I'm pretty happy with the game. I don't really know what I want from No More Heroes at this point. Other than just, I think there will always be the desire of mine to just have like a really solid set of bosses again that really feel personable in a way that makes a connection with Travis. I feel like that's been missing for the last 3 games, and that still is missing in No More Heroes. Obviously there are exceptions in the game, but I think when you look at that first lineup of 3 bosses, like, all of them are just kind of like, oh, whatever, like, fine, kind of thing. This game ends on a really high note, though, which I'm glad. And there's a lot of like weird references. Like if you're like, hey, I'm just gonna play No More Heroes 3 because that's the next mainline No More Heroes, like, Travis Strikes Again plays a huge role in this game. So if you have not played Travis Strikes Again, I would recommend it. Obviously it doesn't really matter because No More Heroes is a game that doesn't really treat its story as precious. But it's something that I think you would get more appreciation about what's happening in the story and what these characters are doing. There's a lot of characters that are pulled, straight from Travis Strikes Again, that if you just play No More Heroes 1 or No More Heroes 1 and 2, you'll really be missing out on. So, and I think Travis Strikes Again, while not the perfect video game, is definitely a fun thing to sit down and play through personally.